Hey there, welcome in my session around Azure Logic Apps for IT pros. My name is Peter Tanner. Feel free to keep some interaction live by sending me an email about the session or reaching out on social media. To start with a couple of words about myself. So my name is Peter Tanner, based out of Belgium but traveling the world as an Azure architect and trainer, mainly providing workshops to larger Microsoft customers, Microsoft partners, and Microsoft internal teams. I'm a Microsoft certified trainer for a bit more than 10 years, an Azure MVP for 4 years in a row, and an Azure Advisors member. In 2016, I had a couple of months background as a Microsoft FTE in the Azure engineering team as a program manager. In my free time, I try to spice up my own knowledge around Azure by creating books, writing courseware, and overall being a technical writer. Earlier last year, I started an Azure-focused community, Azure Platform Experts, that anybody can join using Meetup. Now drilling down on today's session. It's starting with an overview of what Azure Logic Apps is, followed by explaining why Logic Apps is interesting for the ITPro audience. In between, doing quite a lot of demos and ending the session with a specific Logic Apps service built in the Azure platform around Azure Security Center playbooks. Now, when I deployed Azure Logic Apps a couple of weeks ago at a customer, this was literally the feedback from an IT manager. Azure Logic Apps is the masterpiece of automating your IT operations. Using easy-to-build workflows without needing to know any code, also known as being a developer, I can automate about 80% of my day-to-day IT tasks as a sysadmin, and that within the first few hours of using it. Now, when highlighting a couple of keywords there, for me it was all about automation. Automation using workflows without needing any developer skills. And it only took a couple of hours to actually implement it in production. And again, this is really about migrating, really automating 80% of the day-to-day IT tasks in just a couple of hours. Pretty impressive. So highlighting some of the details around Logic Apps and in between doing some demos and hopefully convincing you about the beauty of using Azure Logic Apps. Now, when we think about Azure Logic Apps in the overall Azure application landscape, it's part of the overall Azure Applications. So pretty similar to web apps, mobile apps, and API apps. Logic Apps is also part of Serverless Computing, which means it's really built allowing you to run optimized DevOps. Also allowing you to reduce time to market because you don't need to deploy servers, you don't need to deploy an operating system, you don't need to install applications. It runs as a service. And from a billing perspective, there are a couple of details and I don't want to spend too much time on that one in this session, but it's mainly built around an action. And a couple of thousand actions per month only cost you a few US dollars, so pretty affordable. Now, in short, what Logic Apps gives you from the serverless computing is full audit logging of all management operations. Everything around Logic Apps can be logged, can be traced, part of the activity logs can be highlighted out of the diagnostics logging, so pretty intuitive to use. And although it runs as some kind of service, a like scenario, it's still giving you a lot of detailed logging and feedback. It integrates with Azure Active Directory role-based access control, where you can define who from within your organization can actually manage Logic Apps. It follows a deployment lifecycle using Azure Resource Manager, which also means that it's not available in the Classic portal. It's relying on resource management APIs as well as a resource PowerShell. So if you want to build out more complex Logic App workflows or even deploying a massive amount of workflows, you could probably use PowerShell to automate even that task a bit more than using the portal. And interesting enough, it's also fully supported in meantime on the on-premises version of Azure Stack. So in short, all of the native Azure capabilities are basically provided. Now quickly showing you what Logic Apps is doing. So in my Azure portal, I have a couple of Logic Apps running, and I'll drill down in each and one of them later on in some other demos. But for example, one of the capabilities here is an event that we're running for which I want to follow some social media statistics. So what it does is providing a Logic App Designer, where again I can build some interesting and even intelligent workflows like this one. When a new tweet is posted, just send me an email. And again, this is just the basics of what Logic Apps can do, but more on that later on in the session. Next to that, since it's relying on a lot of other components in the Azure platform, Logic Apps is also smart, extending it with, for example, artificial intelligence, cognitive services, integrating with machine learning, creating bot framework integration, or even extending with other software as a service components, or even running it in a hybrid topology, executing certain tasks against on-premise running applications or data. Now in short, when we start with a question, why should I use Logic Apps? What can it really do? In short, it's a hyperscale workflow engine and really built born in Azure, providing you faster integration using the Visual Designer. And again, I'll show you in a demo later on how it's actually working. Easy workflow development using triggers and actions, allowing you to mesh up applications, data and services, really built for mission critical enterprise integration, and allowing you to create Logic Apps, deploy them, manage them, and not to forget, monitor the actions. Now, one of the business services, again, Logic Apps was mainly built from a developer perspective, not really thinking about IT pros, where a lot of those intelligence features are coming from connectors. And a connector can be about anything. Microsoft integrated applications, but also third-party applications. Where from a data perspective, think about firing off actions against a database. SQL, Oracle, MySQL, doesn't matter. Sending out messages. I'm not talking about Office 365 here, although it's also a valid connector, but really about sending telemetry information using IoT hubs, service bus, event hubs, things like that. Or from a big data perspective, using Power BI, using Azure Data Lake, integrating with, again, Office 365, third-party applications, Salesforce, SharePoint, Dropbox, DocuSign. You think of it, and it probably has a connector. And worst case, if there's no connector available, you might get the trick done using APIs. But again, this is about IT pros, and we're not talking about developers. So I assume that APIs is not really of your core knowledge. Now these connectors again are actually the overall building blocks of Logic Apps and really making it very intuitive to use, but also very intelligent. Using a full set of applications, connectors, public SaaS applications. A lot of them are Azure specific, but also integrating with Google, Office 365, I already mentioned. Even integrating with other data platforms, providing you authentication against Google, Facebook, obviously Azure Active Directory, using scaling. Again, this list was just flying by, but in total for now, when creating this session, there were about 160 built-in connectors available. If you're looking for any specific application integration that you're using in your environment, for which no connector exists yet, then don't hesitate to sign up to aka.ms/logicappswish and providing some details on the specific application you want to use and what the connector should be able to do. Now again, Logic Apps is part of the overall Azure application umbrella. Drilling down in the web and mobile suite. It's not available in the classic portal, but who cares? Nobody's using the classic portal anyway. And besides using the Azure portal, like the quick demo I showed you in the first place, it obviously provides an end-to-end integration with Visual Studio 2015 or 2017, and integrating with enterprise application workflows, where BizTalk was actually the predecessor of Logic Apps. Now, using Logic Apps, the next question is, what can it do for me? Why should I use it? In short, it comes back to triggers and actions. Triggering something like the example I showed you already before, if a certain tweet passes by with a certain keyword, execute an action. So it starts with triggers and actions. In the first step, you design the workflow starting from that trigger. Next to that, you execute a series of steps, and in between you can use logic if you want, or defining certain conditions. Each action runs in a specific application service, and on top of that, it also takes care of authentication, integrating with checkpoints like building in logic, and durable execution. It runs and it keeps on running, because again, it's part of the Azure platform services. Now, drilling down a little bit more on those triggers. Triggers can be about a couple of different things. You can send out a request, a recurrence like every hour, execute something based on HTTP, using API connections like I already talked about, using HTTP webhooks or API connection webhooks. But then again, that's probably a bit more for the developers in the audience. After the triggers, again, we're moving over to actions, executing certain tasks, where again, HTTP is a typical one, calling an HTTP web endpoint, or integrating again with APIs, using the Microsoft Management APIs in API connections or API connection webhooks, defining a response as an action, again, based on a tweet that happens, execute a task, sending out an email, maybe even integrating again with other Azure platform components like bot framework or cognitive services. In between, another action type is waiting, and using nested workflows is also supported. Another topic I have to talk about when drilling down on the actual configuration is a call action type, where you can define the scope, a condition, the for each, and until. The scope would be the logical grouping of other actions, where you define different actions and all of them needs to be validated before moving on and setting an action type. A condition is obviously if yes, no, if false, true, pretty similar to what do we know out of like logical operators in PowerShell or Azure Resource Manager templates, for example. For each, pretty obvious, using arrays, using inner actions for each item in an array, and until executing again a wait state based on a condition resulting in true. So that's about the first part. What is Logic Apps? A little bit on the architecture and the overall concept. Where obviously the key question is, why using Logic Apps as an ITPro? Again, think back about my example in the second slide of the presentation, the quote from my customer, the IT manager. It's about end-to-end automation capabilities. You think of it and you most probably can automate it. Another advantage is that it's really providing you a web-based, portal-based workflow designer, where again you don't need developing skills. And next to that, nothing blocks you from really drilling down in the code and really developing and not using the workflow designer, or maybe even using a combination of both. Another advantage is that although it's running as an Azure service, it's allowing you automation within Azure, but also in hybrid cloud. And again, think back about those 160 connectors, where in the end it doesn't really matter where the application or the workload is running. As long as you can connect to it using HTTP, using authentication, then you can integrate to it. I think overall, think of your activities, anything you do as an IT operations person, and just think of automating it. And taking it already one step further, DevOps, where it's really about integrating different teams, operations team, developer teams, and this might be a good step to just get integrated in the developer world, or thinking about automating some tasks in Azure or again in hybrid cloud, doesn't matter. But making your life as an IT pro easier, more, I would say, error prone, where you build the automation engine and it just runs. It executes the task based on a trigger, firing off actions, and it just runs. It's really again, pretty cool. Now, just some examples, some basic scenarios for an IT pro. In short, performing recurring workflows, like checking a website or a service, like, hey, website, are you still there? And whenever the website is not live anymore, just send me an email. Or think of it pretty even broader, like listening for events from, again, a service, sending out a new email, dropping files in OneDrive, Dropbox, SharePoint, whatsoever. Even making changes to Azure resources can be triggered or can be used as a trigger. Integrating with Azure Functions or any Azure resource manipulation if you want. An action type, for example, sending email, one of the demos I'll show you in a minute. Performing a search against services. And again, it's not just about Azure, not just about Microsoft technology, but it's about those 160 connectors in total. So showing you a basic logic app, what it looks like. So moving back to this first item here, whenever a new tweet is posted based on a certain keyword that I decide on, send me an email. So what it allows me to do here, let me open up those details. So whenever a new tweet is posted based on a trigger, for each and every value that I defined before, execute a certain task. Now going to those settings, this one again was based on a tweet for a specific event that we were running. Every 3 minutes, use my Twitter account to check for any tweets, so not just the ones that I'm sending out or receiving, but any tweet in the whole world of Twitter, any tweet message containing those keywords, then execute a certain action, where the action is integrating with Office 365 and sending an email, where I can define the body, the subject, and some additional email addresses if you want. And again, this is all just possible from the Logic App Designer. From here, I could obviously add more actions and just showing you the power of those connectors. Let's say I'm not just interested in sending an email, but drilling down on anything else in Office 365, sending an approval email, deleting emails, creating contacts, sending out items in the calendar, using events, getting room lists. I mean, the list is pretty interesting. Or something specific in Azure, like check for updates in a resource group, where I can integrate with Azure AD, Azure Blob Storage, Cosmos Database, file storage, overall Azure resources. So again, the list is pretty long, and as you can see here, it's just about clicking around, finding the details of the connectors, where it's always a distinction between triggers and actions. So whenever I select Azure Resource Manager, then it will obviously allow me to select my resource group and taking certain actions from there. So that's really, that's really what it takes to build logic apps. Now, obviously, that was a pretty easy example. Whenever a tweet happens, send me an email. Shouldn't be any rocket science. And you probably don't need logic apps to get similar results out of it. So some more advanced scenarios could be listening for service status updates and sending results or maybe even partial results to an email. Listen for file uploads, like if a file gets uploaded, gets saved in Dropbox, OneDrive, SharePoint, or any changes in content, and triggering notifications by email, maybe integrating with other notification engines like Skype, Skype for Business. Copying moving files from one location. One interesting example on the Microsoft website is copying data over from a Dropbox subscription to a OneDrive subscription. Polling services using intelligence for checking websites if the website is still healthy, and not just checking on the website but also providing detailed feedback on HTTP traps, things like that, or information in an HTTP header or the statuses. Like if the website, an easy example that I'll show you in the next demo is checking on a website. If the website is live, cool. If the website returns an error message like HTTP error 400, meaning that the website is not running, then sending you an email that something is wrong. Pretty cool. Automatically updating work items or even deploying Azure resources based on a trigger or a specific event that again you use a trigger and injecting some actions. So a more advanced Logic App workflow could be checking on a website. So showing you here what it looks like starting from the beginning. This would be check website. Link to my subscription, a resource group, just taking any one that I'm already using, and my Azure location where I want to run this Logic App. And this is all happening real time without doing any speed updates whatsoever, so it just takes a couple of seconds. Once I have my Logic App running, I can move to the designer. Starting from a couple of pre-configured tasks, and again, some of these are really enterprise business oriented, but some other ones are really cool for IT pros, like daily reminders received by email, sending email attachments. This one, for example, what I already shared, copying data over from Dropbox into OneDrive, could be a valid business case scenario. Sending an email whenever something happens, integrating with Twitter, Facebook, a lot of those cool things. Or what I'm going to do is starting from a blank template where I'm going to use HTTP. My trigger is HTTP. So the method get, because I want to connect to a website, let's say Microsoft.com, where again here I could drill down on any specific feedback in the headers, like most obviously if my website is not running, like HTTP error 400, then receiving that email and not just every minute like the example I'll show you here. But why not for now check if that website is live. And if the website is running, then I'm going to add a condition, where the condition for now is again sending an email or obviously receiving an email. So what it will do here is integrating with Office 365 as I selected that specific connector, providing my email address, a subject, website is still live, and a body message, all good. Now next to that I can also use dynamic content, where for example I'm receiving the body of a small glitch in the portal, so we gotta redo this here. So get Microsoft.com. Obviously, probably some better examples in your own specific environment, but check every 1 minute and integrate an action, send an email. And again, you would use this one for a specific HTTP header information. The website is live, or what I ended up before the glitch is injecting specific information about the previous trigger. From here, saving invalid parameters every 1 minute. There we go. And obviously requires the body like this. And to speed up the process a little bit, assuming that nobody in the world is now connecting to Microsoft.com, so I'm just gonna trigger this action myself. And as you might hear on the recording, my mobile starts vibrating and sending me some emails. A change happened to your resource groups. Pretty cool. So it's immediately detecting that whenever I connect it to the Microsoft website, I'm receiving an email. So using this, for example, as a day-to-day task, creating a logic app, checking if a website is still live and receiving an email about it. Or again, from a hybrid perspective, integrating with one of those 160 connectors, integrating with Azure Functions, another serverless compute component in the Azure platform services, connecting to event hubs, IoT hubs, starting with templates, maybe using some easy or more advanced design workflows from the designer, and next to that, taking it one step further and using the coding, where from here I can actually show you it's relying on a JSON structure. And again, I know that the session is targeted towards IT pros like myself, but what it does is actually providing you information about your Azure subscription, obviously selecting your triggered information, where the trigger is checking if the website is live, integrating with Office 365, which can be found down here in the parameters section, and sending out an email. So nothing blocks you from starting from the designer and moving over to really using the coding. Or integrating with your developer buddies and immediately deploying and building publishing from within Visual Studio and not using the Azure portal at all. Which allows me to move over to a specific Logic Apps example out of Azure Security Center. Azure Security Center is an overall landing page, a dashboard if you want, in the Azure portal, centralizing all information about your Azure subscription, your Azure resources, and the security posture. So one of the features that currently are available in preview is using playbooks, where a playbook is basically integrating with Azure Logic Apps Intelligence and allowing you to run actions based on security related triggers. So showing you what this looks like, starting from Azure Security Center, where down here there's an option automation and orchestration, where playbooks are showing up. And again, for now it's in preview, but nothing blocks you from creating a specific playbook. Playbook demo 1, linking to, again, a resource group or a new one if you don't have one. And what this will allow you to do is, based on a specific security event that occurs in Azure Security Center, it will allow you to kick off, again, a runbook. Like if, I don't know, a virtual machine sends out any specific information, then maybe shut down the virtual machine, or again send an email, post something on Slack, on Teams if you want. So pretty interesting features there. Lastly, to make sure I'm not running too much out of time, is how can I monitor my logic apps? So again, it starts with triggering and executing tasks. So triggers and run history can be retrieved out of the portal. Integrating with a dashboard monitoring view, providing detailed diagnostics, and obviously even generating alerts out of using logic apps itself. Or integrating with another Azure component that you as an ITPro might already use, using log analytics, or the former name OMS log spaces, OMS log analytics workspace, where log analytics integration out of Azure Logic Apps would be based on the management solution pack for log analytics, providing you job details, triggers and actions, diagnostic logging, and overall logic app status. So showing you in this last demo what it looks like from a monitoring perspective. If I go back to my logic apps, the one I created, check website. So what it shows you here is a detailed status of the running history. So every few minutes it's executing check the duration and the specific unique identifier for that one single task. Or a trigger history, and as you can see here, on purpose, both failed and succeeded, where if I'm drilling down on the failed items, it will redirect me to a more detailed information, hopefully giving you some feedback on the root cause why something is not working. From the other angle, the integration with log analytics. If I start from my subscription, come on. Then from here, within my workspace, I could pull up all information . Drilling down on security events where my playbook, for example, would show up, but it's not running yet. Or moving to the solutions . That's not what I need. I need my workspaces. There we go. We're here also in preview for now, Logic Apps Management. where it provides you some nice looking dashboard views on, again, Logic App runs, showing you feedback on success and failures, drilling down where apparently my browser is having some hiccups here and not really showing me any detailed information, which I think is just some lagging in my internet connection for now, but I'm pretty sure you get the message around monitoring Logic apps. So with that, I'm at the end of my session where I started what is Azure Logic Apps, drilling down on some key features, aspects of using Logic Apps from an ITPro perspective. I talked about Azure Security Center playbooks, and in between showed you some demos. So with that, thank you very much for watching the session. And again, feel free to reach out on social media, send me an email with feedback about the session or any questions you have. Enjoy the rest of the MVP days.